Hi, it's the Chappiness guy. Welcome to today's episode of Vestibular Talks. Today is a very special day as we have an episode with Miss Cynthia Ryan. She is from the Vestibular Disorders Association. She's the executive director at the Disorders Association, or also known as VeDA. I know many of you guys have been waiting for this episode to air. Many of you guys have asked me if I was ever going to do an interview with VeDA and collaborate with them. And here it is. I want to thank everybody at the Vestibular Disorders Association because they've been extremely kind, extremely supportive, extremely helpful, not only with me, but also with all of the people that they deal with on a daily basis, all the people suffering from vestibular disorders. Um, we our battle or in our healing wouldn't be the same without you guys, without the Vestibular Disorders Association and everything that you do to raise awareness and create more of a community regarding this. So stay tuned, guys. Watch the episode and enjoy it. Hi, yes, it's working.
Yay, we did it.
All right. Um, well, first of all, thank you very much for being so patient and for being here with us today on this episode of Vestibular Talks. It really is an honor to have you, Cynthia Ryan from the Vestibular Disorders Association. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So will you be able to tell us a little bit about your story, about who you are and how you got involved in this crazy world of vestibular disorders?
Absolutely. So, my background is in nonprofit management. I've been working in nonprofits for many years. And when I moved here to Portland, Oregon, where the Vestibular Disorders Association was founded about 9 years ago, I stumbled upon this job at VeDA, the Vestibular Disorders Association, and it was a perfect match for me because, I got into working in nonprofits. I used to work in finance. I got into working in nonprofits because I wanted to do something meaningful, something that fills my passion, something where I feel like I'm helping a population that I feel personally connected to. My first job in nonprofits was as executive director of a humane society because animals are my first passion. But vestibular disorders are also my passion because my mother, Eileen, has Meniere's disease and BPPV. And I've seen, over my life, I mean, I remember the first time she's had these problems for a long time, but the first time I remember my mom having a Meniere's attack was when I was 15. So as you can tell, that was a while ago. And it was pretty dramatic. It was the middle of the night. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. My father was out of town and my mother was screaming for my sister and I from her bedroom because her world was spinning. And that night ended up with like 6 paramedics in my mother's bedroom. And it was just, and of course, we didn't know what was going on. It was crazy. And that was the beginning of her journey of figuring out what was going on. And of course, for my mother, like with so many vestibular patients, she was initially misdiagnosed as having labyrinthitis. Later, it was more accurately diagnosed as Meniere's disease, and over her lifetime, she's had more vertigo attacks than I can count. And very dramatic, the type that last for a full day, and where the impact is lasts much longer than that. But of course, for me, as for many family members of people with vestibular disorders, I couldn't relate to what she was going through. I could see the acute symptoms, but in between her vestibular attacks, my mother would complain of many of the symptoms that I now know are associated with vestibular disorders, like fatigue and brain fog, and those kinds of things. And, we always thought that was just mom, and we didn't really give her credit for, what was going on for her. So when I started working at VeDA, and I started hearing vestibular patients' stories, I kept thinking, wow, that's my mom's story, over and over. And it gave validation to what my mom had been going through all of those years, and really helped me, and through me, my family, my siblings, better understand my mother's vestibular experience. And so I think through that, I have been able to share with others what the vestibular patient experience is. And so and I hear from the vestibular patients that I work with all the time how VeDA has been a lifeline for them, because for so many people, they've never talked to anybody who understood what they were going through, and that validation means so much, and then the information that helps them understand what you're going through, because it's scary, and information is power. Information gives you power to talk to your doctors, power to talk to your family, validation that this is real, and power to move forward on your vestibular journey. So, but I also have been really passionate, especially in recent years, about educating the friends and family of vestibular patients, because I think that vestibular patients need a support system. And when their loved ones, especially the people that are closest to them, don't understand what they're going through, it can be very isolating. And that isolation, that social isolation, that depression, really exacerbates the symptoms. So I've been working for VeDA for about 8 years now, and we've been on quite a journey to expand our reach, when you think about the number of people who are affected by vestibular disorders, it's like, 1 in 3 people one in 3 adults in the United States will at some time in their lifetime be affected by a vestibular dysfunction. That's a huge number of people. The key is, and that obviously VeDA, over the 8 years that I've been with VeDA, we've expanded our reach tremendously. Our Facebook following has gone from about 2,000 people to 32,000 people. The number of people that we send information to that are on our email list has grown exponentially as well. So we know we're reaching more people. Our website reaches over 200,000 people a month. We know we're reaching a lot of people, but it's a drop in the bucket, really. And awareness is key. And just as in so many, with so many rare and or unknown conditions, it's a grassroots effort to raise awareness. It's not just about VeDA, it's about our community. Many vestibular patients I know participate in online support groups, Facebook groups, and they get they find a community of support there, but it's also as a community that we can raise awareness of vestibular disorders and, as we like to say, make vestibular visible. When I talk to people in the grocery store, for example, about what I do, I say, I'm with the Vestibular Disorders Association, and their eyes kind of glaze over. And then I say, we advocate for people with dizziness and balance disorders. And they click, they get that. They get the dizziness, they get the imbalance, they get vertigo. Some of them even know the terms, Meniere's or BPPV. But vestibular is the barrier. But that's what encompasses all of these disorders. And so I kind of equate it to what we need to do as a community, not just VeDA, but as a community of patients and loved ones and healthcare professionals, is make vestibular visible, just as the celiac community made celiac more, more well understood. 10 years ago, nobody knew what celiac disease was, and now everybody equates celiac with gluten-free. So, I think that we can do the same thing with vestibular, that helping people to understand that vestibular disorders affect your balance and cause dizziness, brain fog, and are more impactful than you can imagine. I mean, everybody that I talk to, when you talk about dizziness, if they have had even one transient episode, they recognize how debilitating it is. So
you have said so many things and so many key words that I'm like, yes, yes, yes. In my mind, I'm just like, yes. So first of all, your story is very powerful because it's so relatable. Like you don't come from completely not knowing what these conditions are. You lived it with your mom, and like you said, very dramatic because you were fairly young when your mom first had her first episode, and it doesn't matter which age you are, whether you're young or middle age or whatever, or anybody that experiences something like that is extremely scary and overwhelming because you don't know what's happening to yourself, right? Like, like what is happening, and the people around you are even more confused because they are not feeling the symptoms. So they are like, wow, like how can I help? So you feel overwhelmed and frustrated because you want to help your loved one, you just don't know what to do to properly help them, right? So something that you said is creating validation for these conditions, and that is very important because many doctors, yes, if you go to a specialist like neurologists, ENTs, people that are more specialized in their area, they know what a vestibular disorder is. General practitioners, when you go and you say, oh, like I'm feeling dizzy, I'm feeling unbalanced, they're like, oh, I'm sure it's just anxiety. Like they don't really have well awareness of what the vestibular system, like what it does and how it affects us daily. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that many doctors don't take it seriously? They are like, dizziness, it will resolve in a couple of days, couple of weeks. Don't worry about it. Why do you think that they underestimate a vestibular condition?
dizziness is messy. I've heard this from doctors, both primary care physicians and specialists, that dizziness is a very difficult symptom to diagnose because there are so many causes, so many potential causes that span the specialties. For example, dizziness is a symptom of cardiovascular disease. Dizziness can be a symptom of stroke. Dizziness can be a symptom of an inner ear disorder, and even within the vestibular realm, there are different kinds of dizziness. The dizziness, like I said, could be inner ear, or it could be related to the nerve that leads from the inner ear to the brain. So even there, it's difficult to know, there's no one, like if you had a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist. There's no one specialty that owns vestibular or vestibular disorders. So with primary care doctors, so this is what we hear from patients all the time. So they experience an acute episode of dizziness or vertigo, and they either go to the emergency room, where all they're concerned about is ruling out life-threatening conditions like stroke. And once those are ruled out, so they get an MRI and do all these expensive tests. Once those are ruled out, they send them home with medication to cover up the symptoms and tell them to go see their primary care doctor. So they go back to their primary care doctor. Several weeks later, the symptoms continue, so they're continuing to suffer, and their primary care doctor doesn't know what to do because they just don't cover that in medical school. They literally maybe talk about vestibular disorders for 20 minutes in medical school for general practitioners. It's a specialty. And so That's why primary care doctors don't understand it unless they have experience through patients who have had it and bring that experience back to them. So that's one thing that we encourage vestibular patients to do is, maybe your primary care doctor didn't know what to do for you and you had to be your own advocate and find a specialist who did understand what was going on for you, and you got a diagnosis and now you're on the road to recovery. Go back to your primary care doctor and share with them your experience, share with them your diagnostic experience so they can learn from it, because they'll care if you're their patient, they're going to care. One other thing that VeDA is doing to educate primary care physicians, or I don't want to say educate so much as provide tools to primary care physicians, is we've created something called a dizziness triage protocol. Triage is the process that doctors go through when they're initially evaluating a patient and trying to decide what to do with them. Mm-hmm. So we've created these protocols, which is kind of like a decision tree, that help primary care physicians and other primary care providers, because sometimes the primary care provider that you see might be a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner, to help them differentiate between vestibular and non-vestibular forms of dizziness and refer patients to the appropriate specialist. So, as I said, for example, if you have dizziness, if you have the lightheaded form of dizziness, that is more likely to be cardiovascular in nature, and so you would be more likely to be referred to a cardiologist. And then there are, if you have other forms of dizziness or vertigo, then they have to differentiate. Okay, is this what we call a peripheral vestibular disorder, meaning it affects the inner ear, or is it a central vestibular disorder, meaning it affects the nerve from the inner ear to the brain or the nervous system, like vestibular migraine, for example. So if you can differentiate between those two types of vestibular disorders, you would know to send the patient either to an ENT for peripheral vestibular disorders or to a neurologist for central vestibular disorders. So, because getting to the right specialist is the key to getting an accurate diagnosis, and you can't get effective treatment without getting an accurate diagnosis, although that often is what happens with vestibular patients. Sad to say is that they don't get to the appropriate diagnostic specialist, but they do end up going to a physical therapist, and God bless them, vestibular physical therapists who specialize in vestibular disorders are just the most passionate healthcare providers that I know. They really care about their patients, and they will shepherd their patients on the road to recovery and often help them. I mean, they're only treating the symptoms oftentimes if the patient doesn't have a diagnosis, but sometimes in treating the symptoms, they can help them figure out, maybe you actually need to see a neurologist and kind of close the gap and get them referred to a specialist. It's the long way around. It's not the way the system should work, but it is, when, for example, when we're working with a vestibular patient, VeDA has we have a community support coordinator who helps patients get referred to appropriate resources that will help them get on the road to recovery. Information about their condition, specialists that can help them, support networks. But if there isn't a vestibular specialist in their area, a vestibular neurologist, for example, or ENT will often refer them to a physical therapist because they will at least get them started on their journey.
Yes. Cynthia, something very important that you said also is, yes, often you get either misdiagnosed or you get diagnosed and is hopefully early enough in the process, because some people get diagnosed way too late and they've been suffering for many years, and otherwise, or often people just don't get a diagnosis because they keep being passed around from one doctor to the next, and they don't really know how to figure it out. So I think something that beautiful that VeDA has done, so the Vestibular Disorders Association has encompassed all of the vestibular disorders into their page to provide a brief description of each, so people can kind of like relate, like, oh, my symptoms are more like this than like that, because there is not enough knowledge about these conditions out there, and many people divide themselves into little groups, like, oh, this is the group of vestibular migraines, that's the group of vestibular neuritis, that's the group of Meniere's. But VeDA encloses everything into one. So I think that's why it's so beautiful that you guys have worked so hard to gather the proper information and put it available together in one place, one page, to help people. So how do you guys come across finding and differentiating all these different vestibular conditions? Like through years of working with it, or just trying to talk to patients and be like, hey, that doesn't sound like this same case? Like, how do you guys enclose all of that together?
Well, I love the point that you make that VeDA encompasses all vestibular disorders. And I think I'm going to answer your question, but I just want to say about that it's really important to recognize that a lot of people are like, I have Meniere's, I want to talk to somebody with Meniere's. And there are very specific things about Meniere's or BPPV or vestibular migraine, and I get that. But there are also commonalities between all the vestibular disorders that I think brings everybody together. You know, the cognitive problems, the anxiety, the invisible nature of the conditions. And that's how I think that we as a community can help each other. And by bringing all the vestibular disorders together, I think we have more power to raise awareness about these conditions. Now, how VeDA has gathered the information that we have on our website about vestibular disorders, that was actually, it started when VeDA started. So VeDA started over 30 years ago as a support group. You know, there were a group of vestibular patients here in Portland, Oregon, that recognized the need for scientifically validated information about vestibular disorders, because they were running, you know, that nobody understood what they were going through. They couldn't find any information out there that and this was, you know, before the internet. So it was harder to get this kind of information. And so they formed this organization and started started a medical advisory board that is composed of vestibular specialists who are top of their field. And it was this medical advisory board that wrote VeDA's initial articles about vestibular disorders, the different types of vestibular disorders, their treatments, their diagnostic processes. And we've grown that library from a handful of articles to over 100 articles. They are all written by vestibular healthcare specialists, volunteer vestibular healthcare specialists, because we're a very small organization and we don't have any healthcare specialists on staff. So that's part of my job, is to network with vestibular healthcare specialists to keep our articles up to date. We try to keep all articles, to review all of our articles every 5 years to make sure they're up to date. We're always listening to what vestibular patients are saying in terms of what they're interested in hearing about, so that we can write new articles. For example, we recently wrote an article about light sensitivity, because I know that's a big topic amongst especially vestibular migraine patients. That's really, because especially now in the day and age of the internet, when information is abundant and free, as is VeDA's information, it's so easy to get information that you can't verify, that you're not sure is accurate. And so that's why it's really important to us to make sure that our information is scientifically validated, peer-reviewed, and accurate, so that vestibular patients know that VeDA is the place to come to where they can get information. But I also want to say, you know, I think that our scientifically validated papers are essential, but I also think that sharing the vestibular patient experience is important as well. So we have a lot of tools and tips articles and patient stories that we also share on our website, which, they're not, scientifically validated, but I think that the patient experience is so useful in understanding what patients are going through, and something that we have been trying to do is bring together the healthcare, the medical community and the patient community to inform each other. We have our articles that were written by medical specialists to inform patients. Now we're trying to bring patients into, for example, committees that are reviewing clinical practice guidelines to inform the medical community about what's important to vestibular patients. Because I think the medical community often forgets or doesn't they need to be reminded, for example, that quality of life is important. That it's not just about the facts. It's not just about, this is in the research. Yes, the research may be limited to this, but there are other issues that are important, such as complementary and alternative forms of medicine, for example.
It is very interesting, and I love what you guys do. You're right, the patient stories, because I've seen them on Instagram. I follow your page, and I've seen them on Instagram, and it gives it that much validation from patient to patient, because you can relate to it. When I read their stories and I read how their journey began and their symptoms, I'm like, that's me. And then I always try to share it with other people that I have in my network as well, because I'm like, look, this person is living the exact same things that we're living through. And it's so interesting, Cynthia, because these conditions, although very similar, because you're right, like the dizziness, the anxiety, the brain fog, the light sensitivity, the sound sensitivity, the nausea, are something that most of us have in common, but yet the treatment itself is very unique for each person, because some people can take like amitriptyline or triptyline and get better. Other ones take amitriptyline or triptyline and it makes them feel worse. So it is very unique, although the condition might be the same or similar. Each person, each individual, each treatment is so unique. Do you what do you think about that? Why do you think that although the condition is similar because it involves the vestibular system, each different approach is unique?
Yeah. Bridget Wallace is a physical therapist who volunteers with us. She, if you've seen any of our Facebook Live videos, you've probably seen her. She's great. And she likes to say that when you've seen one vestibular patient, you've seen one vestibular patient. Because, as you said, everybody has a unique experience, although there are many commonly shared symptoms and experiences as well. And I don't know how to explain it medically, except that we are, each one of our bodies is unique. And I always try to tell people, your body best, so you need to be your own best healthcare advocate by insisting that your medical providers are listening to you and what's going on in your body, and not just, oh, well, this is what typically happens in these situations. But it's also why it's so difficult. We have patients call us and ask very specific medical questions, like, this is happening to me, why? And, I can't answer that question, not only because I'm not a healthcare provider, but because it is different for everyone. And that's why that's why the most important diagnostic tool for a healthcare provider is a patient history. Tests are important because they give pieces of information, but the patient history tells you about that patient and about their symptoms and triggers and experiences, and a good clinician, a good doctor of whatever type will be able to look at that and use that with the information from tests to determine the best course of action for a patient. So as you said, everybody's a little different, and I think that you can take from that there's no cure all for any particular, you can say, like for Meniere's disease, for example, that diet is a factor, that stress is a factor, hydration is a factor, but for some people, they correct their diet, everything's okay. For other people, they go on a low salt diet, it doesn't fix everything. So you've got to find your own treatment plan, and that's a matter of trial and error. And it's, that's just our bodies. That's not even just specific to vestibular disorders. That's our bodies. They're very complex.
Yes. Yeah. Cynthia, do you believe that many of these conditions go underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed? For example, when I say underdiagnosed, I lived the case myself at the beginning when all these crazy wild symptoms were happening. I was going to many different doctors, and eventually I went to a neurologist. I said, yeah, you have vestibular migraines. But the first few doctors were like, no, we think it's anxiety. Another doctor said, no, I think you have a mental illness. So they didn't, and of course, because they are the doctors, I'm trusting their opinion. I'm like, really? I'm losing my mind. Like, maybe I do have a mental illness. So it was very overwhelming on top of the symptoms to hear something like this. But I didn't feel validated. And so that's when I say underdiagnosed, because many doctors don't really know enough about it. And when I say overdiagnosed, it's because we're seeing many more people like in their 20s or their teens being diagnosed with something like Meniere's, when you're like, well, Meniere's is more common on people that are at a later stage in their life. But many doctors are like, oh, you dizzy, boom, Meniere's. They don't even test if there's any hearing loss. Sorry, they're just like, oh, dizziness, boom, Meniere's, or dizziness, boom, vestibular neuritis. So, what do you think? Underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed, or just kind of like guessing what kind of like matches the symptoms?
Well, let's hope they're not guessing, but sometimes it does seem that way. No, I do think that that there are many vestibular disorders that are underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed. For example, VeDA, in collaboration with one of our medical advisors, Dr. Michael Schubert with Johns Hopkins, wrote a paper in a scientific journal a couple of years ago that, based on data that we've been collecting through our patient registry, which is, people can participate in our patient registry by taking a survey and sharing their, the number of doctors they've seen, what type of doctors, what their symptoms are, and that kind of thing. And that gives us data that we can evaluate to see, to pull things like this out of it, see what the commonalities are between vestibular patients and different diagnoses. So one of the things that we noted, for example, was the overuse of the MRI, which is not diagnostic for most vestibular disorders. Another thing we noted was that Meniere's disease seems to be more diagnosed than the research supports. So I think that I just need to preface this by saying this is not a scientifically validated statement, but it seems to me that doctors, and understandably so, use the diagnoses that are most common, most well known to them, because they're the diagnoses that have clear clinical practice guidelines. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, what a clinical practice guideline is it's a set of rules that the medical profession has put together to help doctors form a diagnosis. Like, for example, with Meniere's disease, you have to have periodic episodes of spinning vertigo, some hearing loss, so there are certain things that go along with that diagnosis. And so a doctor, in making that diagnosis, has to use this list. And if it doesn't fit with what's on that list, then they won't make that diagnosis, or they shouldn't be making that diagnosis. But there are some conditions out there that don't have clear clinical practice guidelines. For example, triple PD, or persistent postural perceptual dizziness, is a new diagnosis. The clinical practice guidelines only just came out. Vestibular migraine also is a relatively recent diagnosis, and that's why we're seeing more cases of vestibular migraine and triple PD diagnosed, because those guidelines just came out more recently. Previously, before those guidelines were out, the only clear diagnoses were, vestibular neuritis, Meniere's disease, BPPV, and so everybody got those labels. So
I am something that I admire about VeDA, or the Vestibular Disorders Association, is that you guys give a voice to the invisible illness, and it truly is an invisible illness, because if you look at me right now, people look at me and they are like, "But you look fine." Oh, I look fine, but I don't feel fine inside. Like, I feel like the world is moving, things vibrate. Sometimes I feel like I'm falling or tilting to one side, even though I'm not, but inside of me, I feel it, and many other symptoms. So you guys provide that voice of validation, and you have, and I'm not underplaying this. I'm actually really serious. You have saved lives, because there are many people that I have interviewed in this show, in Vestibular Talks, that have said, I was contemplating suicide, and I was really going to end my life, until I found VeDA and read that my condition is more common than I thought it was. And then they felt this was real. They felt that, okay, this is real, and other people are dealing with it. I can probably deal with it as well and be strong. So you have saved lives, like, whether you know it or not. Like, you literally, including my own, have saved people's lives, because with these conditions, there are times when you just feel that there is no hope. You're like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life living like this. I don't want to continue on like this. So the darkness creeps in, and you feel the only exit is to end it. But when you come into places like VeDA, and you see the website and all the information, the resources, and all the networks that is there of support, you are like, okay, I'm not alone. Other people understand me. So thank you. It really means a lot.
Oh, wow.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. It's hard sometimes when we are removed from the people that we're helping, and so it's helpful to be reminded of how useful the information is, and the impact it has, that it goes beyond the physical. This is, and I totally understand what it's like to have an undiagnosed condition that impacts you in ways that you don't know if you're going to get better. And I think that that's part of it, is just not knowing and not being believed. So that's why that validation is so important. And also, I think, learning to accept and develop what we call the new normal. How can you improve, and how can you adapt? I like the word adapt, because sometimes, I've said, I don't have a vestibular disorder, I have other invisible illnesses, and I've had to learn to adapt, to do things differently, and there's some things that I can no longer do, and other people don't get why, and may think that I'm making it up or weak. So I get that, And it really helps to just, to hear how other people have coped, and to have tools, to feel like you have something that you can do. It's more concrete. And also, I think, the medical system moves at a snail's pace. We think that it's so advanced, and compared to where it used to be, it is, but there's still so much the medical system doesn't know, and research takes so long. So yes, there needs to be more research into vestibular disorders so that there can be better medical treatments for them. But I also think that what we can do as a vestibular community is support each other in what treatments coping strategies we can share for each other, so that even if the medical system can't help us, we can help ourselves.
Yeah, we can help. Yes, yes. Cynthia, when do you think there will be an awakening of the medical system, that they will actually understand these conditions, the debilitating impact that these conditions have? Because I live in Canada, and when this first was happening, I was thinking, I'm like, how am I ever going to go back to work? How am I ever going to how am I going to drive? How am I going to have my regular life back? And so I asked my doctor, I'm like, can I be in some sort of disability? And they're like, unfortunately, the the medical system and the government doesn't consider this condition to be critical enough to be a disability. And I'm like, what do you mean it impacts my driving, my walking, my day to day? Like, how is this not a critical condition? And they said, yeah, unfortunately, it's not. So when do you think there will be enough validation and awareness from the system itself to say, hey, listen, yes, these people need some sort of financial support, because they cannot longer be expected to work full-time hours, or be on the road driving, or be going up ladders, or being up high. So what do you think?
When is a hard question, and I'm not sure I know I don't have an answer to that. I can tell you that that VeDA is working on some advocacy programs that address those issues, such as trying to get vestibular disorders recognized by Social Security disability here in the United States, such as raising awareness on a legislative advocacy level, so that there's more awareness about why it's important for the National Institute of Health to allocate funding for research for vestibular disorders, why it's important for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to recognize vestibular tests, to fund vestibular tests and treatments. I won't say that I will say that for all of our efforts, there's still a ton more to do, and I think it's a grassroots effort. I think that we need everyone to participate. Like, for example, through our Facebook page and our email newsletter, we have been engaging people like you and our community in legislative advocacy actions, sending a letter to their legislators to encourage them on a specific bill that addresses these issues. Like, recently there was there were two bills, one to increase access to physical therapists, another to increase access to audiologists. These are specific things that we can do that may not seem like they're getting us, to the cure. They're not necessarily getting, it's not like these huge light bulbs, but they're small things that add up, and everybody needs to participate, because it's the communal voice that's going to get the attention of the people in power that are making these decisions. So I honestly and unfortunately think it's going to be a long haul.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But hopefully, we'll get there.
Yes.
Cynthia, something that you said that is very powerful is that adapting. Adapt. So, yes, acceptance and adaptation are key towards healing. So, I've noticed that there are certain groups of people with not just with this condition, but with many other circumstances in life that they are the ones that accepted it and adapted. The ones that are healed, the ones that are cured, which is different from heal, because healing is almost part of adapting and acceptance because you maneuver around it and you're like, okay, I'm able to live with this. The ones that are cured are by some miracle of God. God bless them and lucky them that somehow the symptoms just resolve. Like they are like, oh, my symptoms just kind of like disappear. And there are the ones that are still in that negative space of hatred where they're like they hate the condition, they feel like their life is over, they don't want to go outside, they tried many medications and nothing has worked. What do you think is the part that differentiates the ones that are finally accepted it and adapted and healed, the ones that got cured, and the ones that just haven't had luck and they are in that anger and that resentment state?
I think there are a couple of things there, and I know what you're saying. I've seen that with the people that call VeDA for help. I think number one, everybody goes through the process, the stages of grief in their healing journey, and everybody is at a different phase of their recovery, and so some people are still in that phase of not accepting, of struggling, and being and anger, which is a stage of grief. Some people stay in that phase longer than others, and some people can't get out of that phase. So I think that just as we're all different physically, we're all different mentally and emotionally as well. We have different coping strategies that are based both on our life experience and our physiological inputs. You know, there's so much that we don't know about the brain and how the brain deals with stress. And so I think that there are some people that and I'm just, again, this is not based on any, scientific research, but I think that there are some people for neurological reasons that don't cope as well with stress. Mm-hmm. And so it's harder for them to work through that process of grief. On the other side, I think that I'm going to call it mindset, but I mean a mental approach to coping with difficulties can be very effective and influential in your recovery. And as a matter of fact, I'm working right now with a psychologist who treats people with vestibular patients to write an article about that topic. How can you use your mindset to help your healing? Because I do think that it's that mental and emotional healing is a part of this. And VeDA has a couple of articles on our website that are about the psychological impacts of vestibular disorders and also about chronic illness and vulnerability. Because when you have a chronic illness, it exposes you to your vulnerabilities that normally, especially we as Americans, or many of us, we've been brought up not to believe that we can do anything, and that expressing any type of vulnerability is a bad thing. Yes, it's a weakness, and so when you have a chronic illness, it's an inherent vulnerability, and so a lot of people, we've been programmed to fight against it rather than to accept it.
Yeah. We're almost done because I see our time is, we're having so much fun that our time is running by. Uh, Cynthia, many people want to find the magic pill that is going to be like, is that the cure? In my opinion, from my experience, it has been a holistic approach. Medication, yes, meditation, exercise, proper diet, acceptance, learning to love myself, and adapting to my new life. Obviously, I will hope and I would love to one day be fully recovered, but I believe I'm doing fairly good for the circumstances. What would you like to say to the people that are desperate trying to find that one magic pill that just takes everything away at once? Like, what would you like to? I would like to reach them and approach them in order to teach them that it is a holistic approach and it takes time and patience.
Well, I don't think I can say it better than you did, but I think one day at a time maybe is an approach to get started on that journey of healing. Is, what can you do today, and just it's using mindfulness is very helpful because it keeps you in the moment, and instead of chasing, what could be, or what did I lose, what is, life life is never going to be what it was. If you look too far into the future, that can cause a lot of anxiety because there are a lot of unknowns. But if you just stay in the present and you say, what can I do today? Then it gets you to the next day. And that's a step forward.
Yeah, yeah. Cynthia, where can people find VeDA? How can people reach out to you? What's your website, your social media?
I think the best way to start is on our website, which is vestibular.org, vestibular.org. We're also on all the social media channels, but primarily on Facebook. We do post very actively on Facebook, and we have a great community there. And you can just give us a call or email us. We do have, we have a community support coordinator, Andy, who will help you personally on your journey to finding resources that will get you to that next step.
Awesome. And my last question is, how can all of us support VeDA to continue with the impact that you guys are doing in order to give us a voice to this invisible illness? How can we all of us gather together to give you that support, that backup? What can we do?
Thank you. There are lots of ways that you and everyone can support VeDA. We're a very small nonprofit organization, so we exist through the generous donations of our supporters. So always making a donation to VeDA is incredibly helpful. But also following us on Facebook and or other social media channels and sharing our posts gets the word out there. Like I said, this is a grassroots effort to raise awareness. So participating in our events like Balance Awareness Week, to share your story, share our information to get the word out there. And if you're passionate about this, becoming a volunteer, becoming an ambassador for the cause, and you can find information about that on our website.
Awesome. The one comment, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I like to invite people to yes, share VeDA's vision and share the post on social media, because I believe there is a misconception that in order to support VeDA, you have to be an ambassador or a volunteer. And some people have said, I wanna support him, but an ambassador, there are quite a few requirements that you have to meet in order to be an ambassador. And I try to tell them, like, no, you don't need to fully become an ambassador. You can just copy their Balance Awareness Week and post it on your social media accounts, share it with your friends, with your family. But people feel that they have to be part of the ambassador group. So I like to invite them and say they don't have to. They can just do it openly. And obviously, if they tag you, even better, because the more support you're receiving out there in the social media community, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just sharing our posts on Facebook is a great way of supporting VeDA, because it gets the message out there. You know, our Facebook posts have information about vestibular disorders, information about patient stories, information about actions that you can take. And it also connects the people who are reading it back to VeDA, because that post might get shared by someone else and end up in someone's feed who is experiencing dizziness that is undiagnosed, and they don't know where to go to get information. So we would really like to get the information out there about vestibular disorders and direct people back to VeDA's website so that they can get the information that they need to get on their road to recovery.
Absolutely. Cynthia, thank you very much. This has been amazing. It's been an honor talking to you. This has been a very informative interview, and I know many people are going to benefit from it. So thank you very much, and continue saving lives and continue being a voice to our condition and making it a reality, because we can believe and understand that you are working your hardest to make it known that vestibular conditions are real. So thank you.
Thank you. And remember, it's not just us. VeDA is very small. It's about all of us.
Absolutely.
You and everyone out there. So thank you for the opportunity.
For sure. All right. Bye, Cynthia. Thank you.
Bye.